Hello, and welcome to mentorDINO. I'm your host, Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. I firmly believe that architecture, engineering, and construction professionals can achieve true success by embracing human skills as their guiding principle. So each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the AEC industry as a way to share stories, inspiration, and advice for others finding their own unique career path. Thank you to all of our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So if you like this episode, please do me a favor and hit subscribe, like, or leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support them on their own career journey. So let's dive in. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the mentorDINO podcast. I'd like to welcome Chad Haller, principal at 10K Architecture in Hopkins, Minnesota. Thank you, Chad, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on the podcast.
So I always like starting out with my loaded question. If you don't mind introducing yourself and letting my listeners know a little bit about your experience and journey so far in education and your career.
Sure. So Chad Haller, principal and owner of 10K Architecture. Little bit of my background. I grew up in central Minnesota, so I'm from Sartell, Minnesota. Went to undergrad at the University of Minnesota, and then did my graduate degree at Arizona State University. I was a teaching assistant at Arizona State, which kind of specialized in 3D modeling. I did TA architectural history class as well. Moved back from Arizona about 11 years ago. Worked at a small firm in South Minneapolis and did a lot of high-end residential, some school work, some restaurant work. Really have done a little bit of everything. The firm that I was at in Phoenix was a large firm that I joined shortly out of grad school, and they did a lot of shopping center work. So it was, big box stores, but also a lot of small retailers. And so I do also have a lot of background in land use entitlements. So everything from designing a building to meet city zoning code, development guidelines, to getting the project through at a city level, which in that case can be very challenging in some of the western states like California. So moving from that work back to Minneapolis, the firm I was at, it was a very, I'd say, high detail oriented firm where we got a lot into lighting design, millwork design, really, really detailed drawing sets. And so it was good to kind of have both those worlds, both a high level commercial viewpoint, but also a very detailed high-end residential viewpoint. And so when we started the firm about 6 years ago, I was kind of able to pull on that experience and say, we don't want to specialize in any very specific type of work. We feel like myself and the business partners have a lot of background experience in a lot of different project types. And so we see that as a positive, both in terms of maintaining through lulls in the economy, but also just bringing different viewpoints to our projects. And so the firm 10K Architecture is about 6 years old. Have 8 employees. There's 6 architecturally trained staff members here, including myself, and then 2 interior designers.
Great. And before we jump into 10K, I want to back up a bit because you did transition from a large firm to a small firm, but also doing a big transition on project type and what you're doing, because the big box and land use, you're almost at an urban scale, bigger scale picture, to jumping into the nitty gritty, small and detailed. So
Yep.
how was that transition for you, or how did you decide to make that project type pivot?
I think for me, I liked the development side. Just I learned so much from the development side, understanding how to work with the city, all the nuances of the zoning code, and really designing things at a high level. But ultimately, I decided what I was more interested in was the construction side and the having a high attention to detail and thinking about, exactly how a light cove detail works, how the millwork meets the wall in this certain condition. So um, I'm very glad I got that experience from a kind of a high view entitlement standpoint, but the transition for me to the higher detail work, I think better suited my personality. Um, a little bit OCD in that manner that I really like to get into the drawings and really, every 16th of an inch is important in our CAD drawings. So we tend to have a very high level of detail here, and all three partners are used to that level of detail, and we try to instill that in our staff. So
Yeah. Do you have any advice for people trying to figure out what that piece is to them? Like, you discovering you like the construction and detail side.
yeah, I think everyone's personality is different. I think. And I think that's also what's great about architecture and design is that there is this kind of broad urban planning um, part of the process and the profession that's so important. But there's also this very high level of detail that is needed on a lot of these projects. And I think it's a matter of um, experience at firms, and I'd always encourage younger professionals to try to get a multitude of experience. So, if you're at a large firm and you feel like you're not getting that aspect um, of the profession, then I would definitely voice that to whoever the leadership is at your firm. And then it may just make more sense that, hey, that firm isn't well suited for you. But I think especially young in your career, if you can expose yourself to as much as possible to try to figure out what best suits you. And it's not that you can, ignore those other parts of the profession because they all have to work together. But I think just inherently our personality is, we're just more into certain parts of the profession and frankly better at those parts of the profession as well.
Yeah, because there's so much to the profession. And it's not that any firm is wrong in how they approach it, because the beauty of it is every firm is as unique as you and I are. And so
Yep,
it can be hard to find that fit and where that passion is. And just because a firm doesn't work for you doesn't make them bad. It just means it just doesn't work for what you want to do long term. So,
exactly. And I'd always say that, even if you're not loving where you're at, I think just always being a sponge and trying to learn as much as possible, especially early in your career, because inevitably those things influence your career later on. And so I would always just say try to learn as much as you can, try to be a sponge as much as possible.
yeah, that's great advice. Shifting over to 10K a little bit. So, how did you know it was the right time to start a new firm? Like, how did you and the partners come together, have those conversations? Where'd the ball start rolling?
Yeah, so it started about 6.5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. Um, I was working at that firm in South Minneapolis, and I loved working there. I had no intention of leaving the firm or anything like that, but an opportunity came along through who's now our business mentor and the owner of our co-work space, was to design the co-work space that we're actually in. And so he's entrepreneurial. He's owned and sold multiple big manufacturing businesses, and so he's getting near that retirement age, and he really liked the idea of helping young entrepreneurs. And so when that opportunity came about, I didn't necessarily feel ready to start my own firm. That was always the long-term goal, but I still felt like I was maybe 5 to 10 years out from that, just from an experience level. And so I had approached one of my coworkers at the time, which interestingly enough, he was my TA in undergrad. And so
Hmm.
we've known each other for a long time. We worked together at another firm in South Minneapolis in the early 2000s. Um, and then I moved to Arizona. I stayed in contact with Jim, my business partner, and then um, it got to a point with the firm in Phoenix that I just was feeling like, um, as much as I did enjoy my job, I wanted to explore more of the profession. I felt like I was an architect, but I wasn't really truly an architect because I didn't understand the building code and the construction and all of that. Along with that, my wife and I had a baby, and so we decided we need to move back to Minnesota to be closer to family. We worked together at that firm in South Minneapolis, and then that opportunity came about, and I approached Jim and said, I know you want to start a firm. And I also, when I approached Jim, Jim is a very experienced architect. He's, we're kind of, I guess, yin and yang in that Jim is really, he's a good designer, but he's also very good at the contracts, the proposals, managing the finances, um, all of those aspects of the business. And I knew just based off my experience level, I wasn't there yet. I couldn't start a firm by myself. And frankly, I didn't want to start a firm by myself. I feel like having a business partner is huge in terms of, that partnership and having someone to bounce ideas off of. Um, and keep each other accountable. There's a lot of reasons a business partner is a good idea. And so Jim was on board. We started the firm out of his house in St. Paul, worked there for a few months while we were designing the office we're in. And then eventually we moved into the office we're at now, and we've been here ever since.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for, I know it tends to be coworkers that end up going off to create a partnership. Do you have any advice for leaving that firm on a good note when there's multiple people leaving? Because it wasn't just you, it was you and Jim
Yeah,
that firm was losing. How was,
it was that was one of the more difficult things I've ever had to do in my profession because I to this day I have so much respect for the bosses I had there. I learned a ton while I was there, and I was treated really well there. So it wasn't really that I was leaving a place I was unhappy. It was more that I was seeking my own, you know, going after my own aspirations, my own goals. Um, it's not an easy thing to do. I think all you can really do is try to make that transition as easy as possible. Um, when we left, my business partner Jim was the project manager, and I was the job captain on a pretty major addition to a private school in the metro here. I think a 20 million plus project, and so it was a big blow to the firm at that time because we were right in the middle of the project. Um, but fortunately, our bosses were really great about it. They had done a similar thing on their own. We were able to work together with them, that we would continue to work on contract as we started the firm, help them get that project done and out the door, and sort of transition our way out. And so really that turned out to be a win-win because we got the project done for them, but it also gave us a big kind of steady source of income to start the firm. So it was really best case scenario for us. I think it's probably unlikely that every case is going to be that way, but it's certainly worked out well for us. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to professional decisions, you have to do things that are in your best interest, but you also want to do it in a way that's as professional and as possible and try to help that transition as best you can.
Yeah. And it's great advice too, because then it helps others understand it doesn't have to be cut and dry. And just having, if you know there's a project getting completed and you need some more time, at least offer that availability to help finish that project. So a firm's not in a bind to get a project done. Like you're still working on it while you're also working on the business, but pulling back on hours is a great opportunity. Your firm could have said, no, get
Yep.
lost, like, but at least they were amendable to, hey, you guys are a great team and let's keep this up, and understanding where they were when they
Yep.
started the firm. It's a lot like when we all start our careers. It's you forget where you started sometimes. So
Yep.
I appreciate that they could reflect back on that and how they started.
Yeah, and reflecting back on it, especially as a business owner now, I know how difficult that would be for us if that happened to us. But I think that experience helped me a lot to understand that this is a profession, and people are going to come and go. People have to pursue what they're passionate about, and if that's not where they're at, then you have to respect that and try to support them if you can, and make sure that that departure is amicable. And I always say in situations like that, if you can come out the other end and still be friends, that's a great um, ending to that relationship. So
Yeah, because you never know when you're going to work together or, I don't know,
yeah,
merge firms, like predicting crazy futures. You never know
yeah,
what
and
life's going to throw
even
you.
there's been times where they've gotten too busy and they've actually referred work to us, and vice versa. So I think at the end of the day, it worked out really well for everyone involved.
Yeah. And jumping into the company name, because I know whenever I started mentorDINO, I now have a new appreciation of why so many firms are just initials, because so
Yeah,
many things are already taken already, but 10K
yeah,
is not any initials. So where did the name 10K Architecture come from?
yeah. So it's really challenging to come up with a company name. Um, from day one, we sort of said we don't want to name it after ourselves. We don't want to be the firm that has six initials. Add an initial every time someone joins the firm as a partner. But a little backstory on that. So when I was leaving the small firm in South Minneapolis, I had two opportunities. One was a past coworker of mine and a good friend of mine um, was a partner at a firm in Orange County, California. And so I had gone out there, I interviewed. Um, they offered me the job, and at the same time, I had this other opportunity come up to start my own business. And so I was really trying to decide, do I move to California and join this firm, or do I stay in Minnesota, which I had just moved back to Minnesota? And so a small part of the name was, okay, I chose Minnesota and I chose to stay in Minnesota. And Minnesota, as everyone knows, is the land of 10,000 lakes. And so that was the initial idea for it. But it was also just that we do have an appreciation for Minnesota and the beauty of Minnesota, and the natural landscape here. And so that was another big part of it, was we were passionate about the Midwest, and particularly designing in Minnesota.
So do you guys just design in Minnesota? Is that where?
No, we didn't think that far ahead about how that might pigeonhole us. But no, we've done work in Colorado, Nebraska, the Dakotas, um, hopefully Wisconsin here soon. But yeah, we do work a little bit all over the place. So
Yeah. And diving into the work, I know you offer residential and commercial design, and I know some people would pick one or the other. So, how do you guys tackle those different animals and decide what the team works on?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and that's something I've learned a lot about the last 6 years is how different the commercial world is from the residential world. Um, the residential world is a lot more challenging, in my opinion. It's rewarding, but you're working with great contractors, but they operate a different way than the commercial contractors. You're also working with homeowners, which in a lot of cases have never worked with an architect before. They don't even know what an architect does. And so the residential side is super rewarding, but there's a whole layer of education that you have to give your clients on every project, um, on what that process is, how long it takes, how much it costs. So there's that part of it. The other part of it is, on the commercial side, we tend to pick, we do interior design. We pick all the finishes. We pick every light fixture, plumbing fixture. Um, the residential side, particularly up here, tends to be the architect and the interior designer are separate. And
Mm-hmm.
so the interior designer, and not only are they separate, but the interior designer is expected to pick the furniture. They're expected to buy the furniture. And that's just not something we've ever been set up to do. Like tax-wise, we can't purchase furniture. Um, so navigating the residential process has been a bit of a learning curve for us, I would say. We're getting more accustomed to it, better at it. I would say the other thing with the residential side is when you compare it with commercial is when we issue our drawings, we want all the selections made. We want every tile, plumbing fixture, we want that all in the drawings. It's in a nice schedule. The contractor takes it, hard bids it, number comes back. The residential side tends to not work that way all the time. It tends to be more fluid where it's, we still have that schedule, but it's more allowance based. We don't know what the tile is. We don't know what the plumbing fixture or the light fixtures are. So during the process, during construction, it tends to be a little less organized, I would say, than the commercial side. So we're always trying to improve on our processes, but that's something we've had to learn about the residential side quite a bit. As far as who works on what here, I think what's great about our firm is everyone works on everything. So there's 8 of us here, and you may be working on a mental health clinic in St. Paul one day, or the next day you might be working on a house, a big lake house. So everyone here gets that experience, and I also think that experience improves our work in both commercial and residential. So, like for one of our projects in particular, the ham clinic in St. Paul, a lot of mental health clinics or medical projects in general can be a bit, sterile and institutional feeling. So we feel like our ability to do residential actually helps us make that mental health clinic much more residential feeling and more comfortable. And we also don't mind pushing the norms of what a mental health clinic has to be. It doesn't have to be 12 by 12 VCT. What other finishes can we bring in here? And yes, every other clinic does this, but do we really have to do it? So I think that crossover between residential and commercial is actually really important for our firm. The only downside I would say to that is, particularly on the high-end residential, it's a big turnoff for clients to see that you do commercial. And we've discovered that just from our experience that there's this preconception that we can't design something that's more residential and we're commercial, and so we should just pick a lane. So that's something we struggle a little bit with them from a marketing standpoint. I'd say the
That's
architecture,
interesting though.
yeah,
For
the architecture firms here tend to pick one or the other.
Hmm.
So I'd say we are one of the very few that does both.
Yeah. I know whenever I was graduating, granted, it was still part of the recession, so I didn't really have selection options, but I was surprised the lack of firms that weren't both residential and commercial because
Hmm.
like I didn't know which direction I wanted to go in. So it was like, hey, it'd be great to test out both to see what I
Yep.
like, but firms don't really do that. But with residential, it's always, the owners don't know as much about what architects do. They do this once and that's what
Yep.
they do. And so I'm surprised they're turned off so much by you guys also doing commercial. Did you figure that out from like a different events or were you surveying people? Like,
I think it was just, I think it was through the residential projects that we got, there was this hesitancy to work with us on the interior side.
hmm,
I think there's this general, okay, you're an architect, you do the structural parts of the project and the building envelope, but you're not doing the interiors. We have this other person that can pick pillows and finishes and all that other stuff. There's this kind of um, I guess stereotype, for lack of a better word, that there is this clear separation between architects and interior designers. And on the residential side, that separation is magnified, um, twofold. That architects can't design interiors, um, and frankly, interior designers can't design the architecture. Which another great thing about our firm is our interior designers are working on everything. I mean, it's not uncommon for our interior designer to be working on a, you know, wall section or detailed drawing. Like everyone here gets to work on everything.
yeah. And that's an awesome experience they get. So how
Yep.
does the marketing and business development side change for you as you go after one versus the other since
Hmm.
they have those different nuances?
Yeah, I would say the most successful marketing on the single family residential side has been contractors. So, and I don't know if this is a regional thing or if it's common everywhere, but I think when people are doing this, their dream home, they tend not to think the architect first. They tend to think the builder first. And so establishing relationships with the builders of the projects that you want to do would be what I would recommend the most.
And that makes
Um,
That makes sense because I've done residential on the side, and I'm like thinking back to the couple projects I've done. I'm like, yeah, they've already had somebody on board to do pricing in the contractor side, and then it's the contractor that
yeah,
tells them, okay, now you need an architect to actually
yeah.
do this. So,
It's very rare unless you have a very well established reputation as an architect that someone's going to call you out of the blue and say design a $3 or $4 million house. It's more likely that you're going to have to establish relationships with builders who bring you into projects, and then hopefully you build that portfolio up enough that you're the first one that gets called at some point. But I would say early on, if you're just getting into the single family residential, your focus should be primarily on the builders.
yeah, that's great advice. Does the
Um,
does the fee structure change between the projects? I've heard because you have to educate the clients a little bit more that fee structure
yeah.
is broken out a little bit differently on residential versus a little bit more typical that I've seen on commercial where they understand what schematic design, DD, or even full packages are.
Yep. I would say the commercial side is much more fixed fee. So that's kind of the norm is that, here's the scope of the project, give us a fixed fee for everything. Um, that's pretty straightforward. The residential side tends to be um, percentage of construction up here. And so, but again, if we're doing full interiors and the architecture, our fee is going to be higher than the architect we're competing against, who's giving a percentage of construction for just the architecture and then bringing in interior designer. in and paying them more than likely hourly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that gets tricky. And so I would say if you're structuring your proposal and you're a firm that's going to do both of those, you should separate those fees out, to just to make it really clear so that your number is not being directly compared to the other architect who's just doing the exterior.
Yeah.
Um,
Helps to find apples to apples whenever, like, even if you're
yeah,
just finding a contractor for a home project and you're trying to
yeah,
decipher who included what, who didn't include something that then they're going to throw a change order at me, or, oh, we didn't discover that ahead of time. So,
yep, exactly. And I would say we've done it different ways on the residential side. We've done hourly not to exceed a cost of construction,
mhm.
which is, I think, easier to sell up front because it's easy to make that argument that you're only paying us for the time we spend, and if this process goes really smoothly and it's efficient, you might see some savings in our fees. Um, However, the downside to that is project comes in over budget, and now you've got to go back and redesign, and then there can be this sort of tension that, hey, you designed a project that's over budget, and why am I paying you again? So, and then there's also the argument of, okay, I chose to put in a gold countertop. Why am I paying you more money for the gold countertop?
Yeah.
So I don't know that there's a perfect way to do the fees on the residential side. Um, Personally, I like establishing a fixed fee, whether it's a percentage of construction and then using the budget number for
Hmm.
that. Um, or just saying it's a set fixed fee for each of these scopes of our services, because the other thing we don't want to do is feel like we're handicapped by our fee. We're gonna put in the time and the effort to make sure the project is a success no matter what. And we also don't want clients sort of saying, well, I don't really need you to do that drawing of the kitchen because I don't want to pay you to do it. We'd almost rather just say we're going to do the drawing of the kitchen because it's the best thing for the project. Um, so it's not a it's not a clear-cut answer I'm giving you. It kind of depends a little on the client and the project. I would say my preference is if you can do a fixed fee, whether it's a percentage, um, or just a straight out flat or fixed fee, that's what I would prefer.
Yeah, because you have to protect yourself as a business first. You can't just always be running out of money with every residential project, or you wouldn't be doing them anymore.
Right.
But giving those opportunities, if you end up with an owner that is struggling with all the decisions that need made, I find when I have friends that build their own house, they're shocked on the decisions they make, and
Yeah.
they go a developer build house, and I'm like, yeah, that's not even half the decisions you would have to do if you
Yes.
did your own.
Yeah.
And you never know
I
who's going
think
to struggle or who's going to make decisions and be decisive.
yeah. I think that's also a big process thing too. And it's getting to know your clients well enough that some clients they trust you to make those decisions and they don't want to be involved in all of those decisions. Other clients want to be involved in every aspect of the project, from what is the outlet style to you know every part of the project. So I think it's asking those questions early on, even before you do a proposal, to try to
Mhm.
get a feel for what process is most likely on this project. Because you also don't want to get in that situation where you're just burning fee because decisions aren't being made, and every little detail has to be discussed, and you're doing 4-hour meetings. Like,
Yeah.
you, it's better if you know kind of what you're walking into before you agree to a fee.
Yeah, that's great advice. Um, Speaking of advice for figuring out clients and adjusting, do you have any advice for those first few years of having a business now that you've reached year 6? Also, knowing that 4 years ago would have also been COVID throwing a wrench into different things. So, how was that
Yeah.
experience starting out?
Yeah, it's tough. My business partner and I look back at our finances for the first year and we kind of were like, what were we doing? Like how did we bring in so little money? So I would say the first thing is you have to sort of expect that at first. You're not going to jump in and you're likely going to make less money than you were making at the firm you were at, but you have to accept that. Um, I would say that you have to start small. I mean, that's just the reality of it. You have to kind of do your research and figure out, okay, what's our goal? You have to establish what's our goal 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What kind of firm do we want to be? And then you have to target those clients, and you have to go out after them and say, okay, just give me something small. Like I don't care if it's an ADA bathroom or just something small. Like it's totally a trust business, and you have to build that trust with people before you're gonna get the big project. Um, so I would say like day one, you kind of have to check your ego a bit and say, I might have to do the kind of projects I don't want to do long term, but I have to do those short term as a means to build something. But the caveat to that is I would say only take the projects that you like that you see will build to something more. Don't just take the little project that's the one off that's going to lead to
Hmm.
nothing down the road. Like I think even early on you have to be particular about, you know, who you're working for and what your ultimate goals are.
Yeah. Did you guys have clients lined up before transitioning?
Not really. Honestly, as you leave a firm, you can't just start going after their clients. I would never encourage anyone to do that. I wouldn't do that. It's an ethical problem. So that's one of the challenges. You really have to kind of distance yourself from the people you have been working with. That's a tough area to start going after clients of past firms, and I wouldn't recommend that. Um, but I would say early on, you just have to be active. You have to go to the 8 a.m. real estate seminar and try to meet people. You have to go to um, you know, the the different associations around town and really try to meet people. And I think if you do those things, you'll find that people appreciate that you're an entrepreneur, you're starting something on your own, and a lot of people want to give you an opportunity. And then I would say when you get that opportunity, you have to hit it out of the park.
Hmm.
Like it has to, you have to wow them and make everyone's life easier to get the next one. So we do very little marketing here or advertising, almost no advertising. Pretty much everything we do is relationship building.
Yeah, because you never know where something's going to lead a year from now or 3 years from now.
Yeah, and there's been clients that, one example is a guy who decided he wanted to leave the company he was at and start developing properties and projects. And, um, we did some work at very little fee, and that builds, and then they start to take root and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and suddenly that turns into more work for you. So,
Yeah, all about that relationship that stumbles into many projects down the road and a repeat client.
yep, absolutely.
So, I know I've talked to a lot of small business owners that are on their own and don't have a team. When was that time you decided to hire somebody beyond the partners?
Yeah, I mean it's a big decision, especially early on when you don't have an employee manual, you don't have health insurance, you don't have retirement plans in place. Um, it's a tough decision, and I would say I would say you can only do so much on your own. And so my business partner and I were finding that having to wear all these hats, we're working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. But a lot of that is doing things that our time would be better spent doing something else. So you have to kind of weigh, is my time best suited drafting this project, or is my time better served going out and finding the next project? And so I think really you just kind of have to make that leap and say, yes, I'm going to have to pay someone and it's going to be tough and I don't know if we can make this work, but you have to kind of just take the leap and have the faith that it's going to work out, and then you have to go look for the next project.
Yeah. Have you hired anybody, even on the like consultant, or I'll say hire as a contractor, not a GC contractor, to help
Yeah.
with any of the admin stuff to take load off that maybe you weren't hiring them full time? Have you guys leveraged those opportunities?
Yeah, so I think early on we learned that we can't do all of this on our own. It's not a good use of our time. So we work with a consultant who helps us with our accounting. So we still do everything in QuickBooks, which I think anyone who's starting a firm, QuickBooks is great in terms of invoicing, and it links to your bank accounts and it really streamlines everything, and makes it easy for your accountant because it categorizes everything. Um, but we learned early on that we need someone to double check all of our work. We still do all of that work in QuickBooks, but we have someone that reviews everything we do, every transaction we do in QuickBooks that is advising us. They also help us with our taxes. You know, we pay quarterly taxes, so every quarter they tell us how much we owe and how to pay it. Um, on the contract side, we work with an attorney who's great and reviews a lot of our contracts. And then, you know, any conflict that comes up, they help us with as well. So I would say hiring someone to help you with accounting and someone on the legal side are absolute must-haves if you're going to start a firm. Um, I think if you can get to a certain point where you can afford an admin person, that would be great too. Honestly, we're not quite there yet at 10K, but we're kind of getting to that tipping point where um, having an admin person would be great. The challenge is bringing an admin person in cold.
Yeah.
You know, we've got all these projects, we're half into projects. Um, they may not have experience with contracts and billing and all of those things. So there's this whole process of bringing an admin person up just to be able to help us. And so we just haven't quite taken that leap yet.
Yeah. But I think it's leveraging beyond just a drafts person as a hire. It's maybe your first hire isn't a drafts person, and it's some of the
Right.
other tasks that are still needed to be done as a business to again free you up to get more work.
Yeah, it's weighing what you're best at, you know. I would say um, if you're really good at drafting and design, maybe that is what your time should be spent doing early on. But you're terrible at those other things, or you're not interested in doing those things. Then you should definitely fill that gap. Because if you're spending time doing the things you don't like or the things that you're not good at, you're only hurting the firm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Has there been anything your team has used or discovered along the way that has been a game changer or you wish you found sooner?
I would say QuickBooks is a great resource for us. We also use Harvest, um, which is a time tracking software. Both of those have been great. Um, I would say we were a little slow to embrace Revit, but now that we're embracing Revit, we're seeing good, you know, we're seeing improvements in efficiency on that side. That's one of the things I wish we would have embraced a little sooner. Um, but Revit has been great for us. And then I would say Enscape has been great too, in terms of producing really quick, I don't want to say photorealistic, but more realistic renderings. Um, and that software in particular has really helped us with one client who is they like a very collaborative process. And so they love the meetings where we can have Enscape open and do walkthroughs and maybe walk the space in VR or change materials on the fly. That's not for every client, but this client, that has been huge for us. And that client has been a pretty significant amount of our work over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and just helping that workflow so you can do that with a client that
Yeah.
wants to. Yeah.
Yep.
And I always like wrapping up my podcast with this final question, and it's what advice do you have for young professionals just starting their career?
Oh, that's a
It's a
tough one.
loaded one.
Yeah. Um, I would say I would say the profession is very, there's a lot to learn. And it can be overwhelming how much there is to learn. But I would say as you go through your process, don't be afraid to feel dumb if you don't know something. Um, I think if you have the mentality of I don't want to look stupid that I don't know this, you're going to really stunt your growth as an architect. I think that willingness to sort of put yourself out there, ask questions, and don't be afraid to to look stupid if you don't know something, because the fact of the matter is there's so much that we have to know and learn, that there's no possible way you would learn everything there is to being a good architect.
Yeah, that's great advice because even like we talked about a lot on this podcast, residential and commercial are completely different animals to touch, and many people focus on one or the other because
Right,
there's a lot to both. And there's a lot
right.
even in specializing in a type of architecture or detailing versus design work.
Yeah, and I would also say if you're going into a firm and you're trying to decide if it's the right fit for you, you should definitely ask who's going to be kind of your supervisor or project manager or whatever that role is over you, and try to get a sense for, are they going to take the time to help you grow as an architect? Because I've coming up in the various firms I've been at, I've always been very fortunate to have people that take the time to sit down with me and explain, teach me uh, different things. And that just takes time, because the reality is you don't learn all the things you need to learn in school, not even close. And so a lot of that's going to be learned in the profession, and you should try to surround yourself with people that are willing to take the time to teach you.
Yeah. And I've had both. I've had great teachers and I have ones that just don't like teaching. And each one of
Yep.
us have our own strengths and weaknesses. And the
Yeah.
ones that are willing to sit down and walk you through is a game changer and an accelerator into your growth. So,
Yep. 100%.
yeah. But it was great talking to you, Chad, and learning more about 10K architecture. If anyone wants to ask you any questions or are local to you and want to reach out to 10K, what is the best way to get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, so probably the best would be my email address. I check my email multiple times a day. So that's on the website. I don't know, do I share that
I
with
can
the viewers or?
I can put the link to your website in the show notes. So up to you
Okay.
on the website. But on there, you guys can find Chad and reach out to him to learn more, or if you're looking for 10K architecture to help on a project or career development and
Yeah.
growing your career, because I'm sure you guys are just going to continue to grow because you guys have some fantastic work.
Well, thank you. And I would also say I'm always willing to meet with any young professional, even if it's not for a position here. There's been multiple times over the last year, even where I've had people into the office that I can just kind of show them what we do and answer any questions they have. Or if anyone is considering starting their own firm, I'd be happy to meet them for coffee or lunch or whatever and share my experiences and give them some advice. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out
Yep, it's a small world and you never know where help can be.
for
So,
sure.
but thank you so much, Chad, again, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Caitlin.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Learn some advice to take with you and see how our industry is all tied together to create the world around us. Check out the description below for any links or resources we discussed. If you liked the episode, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support finding that career path that best works for them. If you know someone that has inspired your own career that you'd like me to interview, let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via my website or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share their story or your own. Thank you again, and I cannot wait for the next career story I get to share with you next week.